Masechet Megilah, Daf Chaf Vav. We begin the fourth perek. I should note that in Mishnah manuscripts and in commentaries of many Rishonim, this perek is actually the third perek, and what we just learned before is the fourth perek. So for some reason, this got switched. But either way, we're still talking about Batei Knesiot, and the topic now is going to be something quite practical. Can you sell a Bet Knesset or other items of Kedusha? Where does that Kedusha go? Can you use it for other things? What can you use the proceeds for? What if something is worn out? Like something that was holy and now you have to throw it out. What do you do with it? So all kinds of really interesting laws. So we begin Mishnah b'nei ha'ir shemachru rechova shel ha'ir lochin b'dama bet knesset. So if the citizens of a town want to sell the town square is a public area that usually is used just for people to get together and people would sell things there. But once in a while, during a major ta'anit, people would bring out the Aron Kodesh and they would actually have the tefillah out in the public square. So therefore, according to the Mishnah opinion, it does have some level of kedusha. So if they decide to sell it, I guess to a private developer or something, they can use the money to buy something more sacred, which would be a Bet Knesset. A Bet Knesset, ochin teba. If they sell a Bet Knesset, that's okay. You can sell a Bet Knesset. The Gemara will discuss the details of when and when you cannot. But assuming that it's a case that you can, well, that money, the holiness of the Bet Knesset goes on to the money. So with that money, you have to use it for something with greater significance. The Rishonim ask, how about equal significance? Probably the same. If you sold Bet Knesset, you could buy another Bet Knesset. So for sure, so maybe something equal, but for sure something that's better. For sure, not something less. So you can buy a teva. The word teva has two meanings. It can mean what we usually say, which is the reader, the Chazan's table, on which we put also the Sefer Torah when we read it, or the Aron Kodesh. And so here it seems to be referring to the Aron Kodesh. So you can buy something greater because Aron Kodesh holds the Torah. That's greater sanctity. Teva dochin mitpachot. If you sell an Aron Kodesh, then you can buy cloths to wrap the Sefer Torah. They probably not like any community does today. But they took nice cloths and wrapped their Torah scrolls or other books of Nevi'im. Mitpechot yikhu sefarim. If they sell these nice cloths, you can use the proceeds to buy the actual scrolls of Nevi'im and Ketuvim and Sefarim Lochin Torah. If you sell those other books, then the highest level is to buy an actual Sefer Torah scroll. Okay, now we're going to go back down the ladder. If you sell a Torah, you cannot use the money for something lower. You can maybe buy another Sefer Torah, but you can't buy other Nevi'im and Ketuvim. If you sell Sefarim, lo yichu mitpechot. If you sell other books, you cannot buy the nice cloth wrappings. Mitpechot lo yichu teva. If you sell the cloth wrappings, you cannot buy the Aron Kodesh. Teva lo yichu bet HaKnesset. If you sell an Aron Kodesh, you cannot use the money to buy a Bet Knesset because this is lo yikachu et harechov. And if you sell a Bet Knesset, you cannot use it to buy the town square. Vechen b'motrehem, and also regarding the surplus funds. In other words, if you sold a Bet Knesset and you bought something and you have a lot of proceeds, and so you bought something that's a higher level, but you have some change left over. Because it didn't. So maybe you'll say, all right, all the kedusha went to the next highest thing. It went to the Aron Kodesh, right? But there's still a little leftover money. So can we use that for something else? The answer is no. The surplus funds, you have to use 100% of the funds for a higher level of kedusha. All right, that's the Mishnah. Gemara, b'nei ha'ir shemachru rechova shel ir, amar Rabba bar Chana, amar Rabbi Yochanan, zo divrei Rabbi Menachem bar Yosef setum ta'a. Aval chachamim omrim harechov en bo mishum kedusha. So the first thing we're going to deal with is the town square. We mentioned that the town square has some level of holiness, And so therefore, if you sell the town square, you have to use it for something better, like buying a Bet Knesset. So Rabbi Yochanan qualifies and says, the Mishnah that you read is an anonymous opinion. And generally, we follow the anonymous opinion. That's because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who composed the Mishnah, he saw all the different opinions. And the one that he thought should be halacha, he took off the name and made it the anonymous. By being anonymous, it's not an insult to the person who first said it, but rather a compliment to say, we agree with you, we want it to be everyone's opinion. So he takes off the name and makes it stam. Sometimes, however, the Gemara wants to disagree with the opinion, with the conclusion of the Mishnah. Well, you can't disagree with the Mishnah. Mishnah is authoritative. Well, you can, because if you show that that anonymous opinion is actually a minority opinion, well, then we can reverse the decision. And that's precisely what Rabbi Yochanan does here. He says our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Menachem Bar Yosef. He's the anonymous one. Maybe that's why you don't hear his name too often, because he's often anonymous. But the majority opinion says that a town square is not holy at all. Just because once in a while you use it doesn't make it holy. So what's his reasoning? Since the congregation prays there on fast days and also ma'amad. This is the non-priestly watches, the people from Yisrael whose turn it is to represent all of Bnei Israel in saying special prayers while the korbanot are happening. So they would get together and pray. Now, we learned about this in Masechet Ta'anit. Over there, it says that they get together in Batei Knesiyot. And never it says over there that they get together in a town square. So this is a bit of a chidush. Perhaps when there was a large group and there wasn't enough room in the Bet Knesset, they would get together in the town square. Okay, anyway, the Rabbi Menachem says a town square has holiness because on somewhat regular basis, it is used for prayer. But Rabbanan says, no, that's not a regular basis. It's an irregular occurrence. Should it not rain for a long time and we have to make these public fasts only once in a while, that happens, and that's not enough to make the town square into a place of holiness. The whole point there is that we're taking the teva out, we're all coming out to the town square, which is a very public place, but not one that's at all dedicated for holy events. All right, that's the first clause. Now, Bet Knesset lochin teva. If you sell a synagogue, you can buy an aron kodesh. Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, lo shanu ela Bet Knesset shel kefarim, aval Bet Knesset shel kerachin, kevan deme'al ma'atule, lo masum is bnei led, hava led rabim. Okay, the Mishnah mentioned a limitation. If you can sell a Bet Knesset, but you have to use the proceeds to buy something higher, like an Aron Kodesh. Rabbi Yonatan makes an even bigger limitation, and he says the only time you can even do that is in a synagogue in a small village. That's because everybody in the village knows each other. It's their funds. They pooled funds to buy the Bet Knesset, so then they have the authority to say, you know what, we don't need this Bet Knesset anymore, and so they can sell it and use the proceeds for some higher purpose. But if it's a Bet Knesset in a big city, then who's authorized? No one's authorized to sell it. The residents of that city, they use it, but also people come, visitors, people that come to work there once in a while, all kinds of people are coming and they're donating. And so this belongs to the larger public, and therefore a synagogue that's used by the larger public cannot be sold at all, not even to use the funds for a higher purpose. Okay, so Rabbi Yonatan here is much more stringent. Amar Rav Asher is going to be more lenient. His high beknishta dimeta mechasya. Afal gav de me'alma atula kevan da'adadidi ka'atu ibaina mizabenina la. Rav Asher says, I have an exception to this rule because this Bet Knesset of Mata Mechasya, that Rav Asher was the rabbi of that city. And even though people come from all over the place, this is the main synagogue of the whole, and so in a way it's a public synagogue, so you might say it shouldn't be sold at all. However, since they run everything according to my opinion. So therefore, if I want to, I can sell it. I'm in charge here. And so it's really not a public Bet Knesset. It's my Bet Knesset. And so I would be able to sell it. Oh, it's a really interesting comment because it shows that this seems to be an exception to the rule that Rav Asher was in charge of this Bet Knesset. It makes you wonder whether, in general, were the rabbis that that we all read about here, the Tanaim, the Amoraim, and Bavel Israel, were they associated with a Bet Knesset? Did they run the Bet Knesset, or were most Bate Knessiyot run by a group of lay people? And then once in a while, the rabbi would be invited to come and speak this week or that week, and it was more lay run. So this is a huge topic among historians. But I think this would be an interesting source to see, at least in this case, Rav Asher says, this is my synagogue, and it's not a public synagogue, so therefore I can do what I want, and if I wanted to sell it, he would be able to. Metibe. Now we're going to have a challenge to this statement of Rabbi Yonatan here. מעשה בבית כנסת של תורסיים שהיה בירושלים שמכרוה לרבי אליעזר ועשה בה כל צרכיו. We have that synagogue of the bronze workers that was in Jerusalem. For some reason, they got together and they pooled money and built a synagogue for themselves. And they sold it to the Rabbi Eliezer. And so that means they were allowed to see, even though it's in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a big city. This would seem to qualify as a public synagogue. It's a big city. So how could they go and sell it to the Rabbi Eliezer, and then the Rabbi Eliezer used it for whatever he wanted to use it for? How were they able to sell it at all? And the answer is, no, it was a small Bet Knesset, and they built it themselves, even though it was in a big city. It doesn't matter. It wasn't a big synagogue. It was like, let's get together. They like to pray with each other. They knew each other, and it really was not open to the public so much. So that's why they had authority to sell it. Okay, good. Another question on that same ruling of Rabbi Yonatan, Metibeh, Bebet Eres Achuzatchem Mitame bin Gaim, Ve'en Yerushalayim Mitame bin Gaim. Okay, this is talking about a sarat of a house. In general, if someone has in their house, they see some mold or some kind of a dark spot, they bring the Kohen checks it out and says, first he'll say, take everything out of the house, because if it is in fact sarat, he declares it to be tameh, and the whole house is tameh. Good. Now, this law applies in a house in your possession, right? In your inheritance. It has to be on land that you own. So this baraita learns from that only if it's land that you own in your possession, in your inheritance, then the law of sarat of houses applies. Ve'en Yerushalayim mitame bin ga'im. But it's in Maryland. It's not actually, doesn't belong to Maryland. It's or like the Vatican. It's not really part of Rome. It's its own entity. So to Jerusalem, it is not owned by anyone, and therefore it doesnn't fall into Bet Eres Achuzatchem. It's not your possession. So even if you happen to have a house there, the law of Negaim does not apply at all. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I only heard that this comes to exclude the Temple Mount. That is a special national area. This is Hashem's property, and no one tribe or one person owns the Temple Mount. But I never heard this law regarding the rest of Jerusalem. Okay, so here's our question. So that means, according to the Rabbi Yehuda, right? Since he says only the Temple Mount is excluded from this law, but other synagogues and Batei Midrash, they would, if you see some mold there, it would be susceptible to the law of tum'ah of sarat habayit. And the question is why? Hadikrachin havu, but they're in Jerusalem. And so therefore, this is a big city. And so why should they be, they should be excluded, since it's not achuzatchem. Nobody owns it, right? And yet it should be, and yet according to you, it's as if someone does own it. So this is a challenge to the law before, where we said that any Bet Knesset that's in a big city belongs to the public, and because it belongs to the public, no one can sell it. Yeah, but if it belongs to the public, then you shouldn't apply the law of sarat to it, right? The fact that you're applying law of sarat means you're considering it that it is your possession. And if it is your possession, then you should be able to sell it. Okay, so this is very interesting. We are bringing together two very different topics. And our answer is, we had one wrong word when we quoted this baraita, not mikdash, but mikudash. Rabbi Yehuda says, I only heard that this exclusion applies to holy places, not only Temple Mount, but any holy place. At least any holy place in Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount and other synagogues and Bet Midrash. Those are excluded. Why? Because they're not Bet Eretz Achuzatchem. No one person owns them. They are synagogues in a big city that is considered public property. And so now this actually accords very nicely with the opinion of Rabbi Yonatan earlier. Okay, now that we mentioned this, we're just going to explicate it a bit. And this is really fascinating about the status of Jerusalem. What's the essence of the machloket between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda here? Tanna Kama sabar lo nitchaleka Yerushalayim lishpatim. Rabbi Yehuda sabar nitchaleka Yerushalayim lishpatim. Tanna Kama says that Jerusalem was not apportioned to the different tribes, right? Even though the whole land of Israel, everybody got their portion, but Jerusalem is a national city. Everybody has equal access to it. But Rabbi Yehuda thinks that it was apportioned, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda would say, if you have a home in Jerusalem, it is subject to sarat because you own it. Whereas Tanna Kama would say, even if you have a home in Jerusalem, yeah, you're living there, but you don't actually own the land, because the whole nation owns the land. There is no individual ownership in Jerusalem. And this in turn correlates with the following dispute. Tanya, Mehaya bechelko shel Yehuda har habayit, haleshakot ve'azarot. Mehaya bechelko shel Binyamin, ulam ve'echal ubet kodshei hakodashim. You see, according to this Tana, not only Jerusalem, but even Har HaBayit itself was split between two tribes, meaning the tribes did inherit it. And it went like this. The part that was for Yehuda was Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, meaning the surrounding area over here to the east, as well as the chambers in the corners here, and the courtyards, right? The Ezat Hanashim and the Ezat Israel. So the courtyards also up until here. Whereas the Binyamin got the Ulam, Hechal, meaning the indoor part over here, the entranceway, the sanctuary, the Kodesh Kodashim, which wasn't here. That was all for Binyamin. Okay, now how about this area in between? Well, that was shared. And so generally Binyamin had most of this area, but Yehuda had one piece. It's represented by this triangle in this picture, but it's not clear how big it is. From the language here, it looks like the entire Mizbeach, the altar, was on the land of Yehuda. Other descriptions say no, only a sliver of it was belonged to Yehuda, but most of the Mizbeach was for Binyamin. Okay, so somewhere over here, that was a dividing line. And this really bothered Binyamin, that he had the whole sanctuary, but he didn't have the whole Mizbeach. And so Binyamin Hasadik mista'er aleha bechol yom lebol'a. Binyamin, the Sadiq, right? I mean, he was before all this, before the split, but he's worried about this. So Shene'emar chofef alav kol hayom. This is from the Berachot in Vezot HaBeracha. The Peshat is talking about Hashem should give cover and protection to Binyamin all day. But the Midrash is reading it as Binyamin himself is worried about this sliver all day long, and he's like, "Oh no, how can we get this back? I want to have that area." And the Fichach Zacha Binyamin v'nasa ushpizchan l'shchina, because Binyamin was so concerned, right, to have this the altar in his area. He got the merit of being the host to the Bet HaMikdash, to the sanctuary area, and including the Kodesh Kodashim. Okay, so you see, according to this opinion, yes, Jerusalem, even Har HaBayit itself, was apportioned to the tribes, and that tribe is, of course, they have to let everybody in, right? But they are in charge there. Okay, and here's another baraita, and this would hold the opposite opinion, that Jerusalem was not apportioned, was not split, it was shared. There's a halacha that you're not allowed to rent out your house in Jerusalem because it's not yours. So therefore, if you have a, you have a house and you live on whatever street, in the old city, and so you say, well, it's my house, right? I own it. No, not really, not so fast, right? You're living there, but when the holiday comes and the pilgrims are coming and they need places to stay, you're not allowed to rent out a room to them. You have to let them in for free, right? Because this is all shared. So you happen to live there all year round. But if someone needs a spot, you have to let them come. Rabbi Elazar bar Sadok Omer, you're not even allowed to rent out a bed. You have to let them stay in your beds for free. It's kind of a beautiful halacha, right? Because today, if you try to go to Jerusalem for one of the chagim, how expensive it is. How do you expect everybody to go there? Well, the answer is, if everybody comes and everyone has to, that's part of the privilege of living in Jerusalem, is 3 times a year you have to open up your house to anyone who wants to come in, and that makes sense if it's in fact a shared city. But don't worry, the hosts also get something in return. And so here's another halacha that says the hides of the renters, they bring korbanot. So when you bring korban, the hide of various kinds of korbanot go back. Some of them the Kohen keeps, but some of them the owner takes the hide, and it's worth a lot of money. And so the hosts are allowed to take those hides even forcefully as payment for, not payment, but compensation for hosting these people. So they do get something out of the deal, but they can't make an official rental agreement. Abaya says, where I learned from this, that it's the proper thing to do to leave maybe a wine flask if you're a guest and you have, you brought some wine or a jug, leave it there, or a hide of an animal, leave it there for your host. And that's a good custom till today. If someone invites you over, probably not going to bring an animal hide, but a good bottle of wine is a nice thing to bring. Amar Rava, lo shanu ela shelo machru shiva tovei ha'ir b'ma'amad anshe ha'ir. Ava machru shiva tovei ha'ir b'ma'amad anshe ha'ir. Rava is much more lenient in this law than all the opinions we've had before. And we said this issue that you cannot, if you sell a bet knesset, you have to use it to buy an aron kodesh, right? That's only if it was sold without the cooperation of the 7 leaders of the town, together with the representatives of the town. However, if the 7, it's called the Tovei Ha'ir, they're the philanthropists of the town, the people that run everything, together with the assembly of the residents. So if it was done in an official way with the leadership, with everyone assembled and everyone in agreement, then they're allowed to celebrate Knesset, and they can use the proceeds even to buy beer and drink beer with, right? In other words, the holiness is not there at all. Because this is done in an official capacity, right? Just like they can collect money to buy a Bet Knesset, that they feel the Bet Knesset is not needed anymore, then they can sell it, and that's it. The proceeds do not remain holy. They only remain holy if you don't have that kind of leadership structure, and just whoever's around decides to sell it. Okay, Ravina havale hahu tilla debe kenishta atalekamer derav asher. Ravina had a piece of land, and there was on the land there was a mound of dirt. It was ruins from a bet knesset, and he wanted to so he wanted to sow it. He wanted to plant on it. So he came to Rav Asher to ask him, am I allowed? It's an ancient bet knesset there, right? It's the ruins of a bet knesset, so it retains holiness, but I don't want to keep it as a holy spot. I want to use it. So Rav Asher gave him this advice based on what Rava just taught us. He said, go and buy it from the seven elders of the town, together with all the representatives of the town, and then it becomes an official sale, and then the holiness leaves the place, and you can use it. Rami bar Abba hava ka bene be kinishta hava hahi kinishta tika hava ba'el mistere ulatuye libne vechishure mina ve'ayule lehatam. Okay, Rami bar Chama is building a synagogue, and there was an old synagogue. He wanted to demolish the old synagogue and reuse the bricks and the beams. Nowadays, we don't reuse bricks too much, but bricks were expensive, hard to make. So he wants to destroy the old one, demolish it, and use the materials for building the new one. So would that be allowed? He came to ask a question. Yatev, it sounds like he may not be a rabbi. He's not called rabbi himself. So, but he wants to consult with them. Yatev kami ba'ele ha de Rav Chisda. Da'amar Rav Chisda. So he sat and thought about, actually, he's thinking about himself. Maybe he is learned, and he knows what Rav Chisda taught. And he said, Rav Chisda said, you may not demolish one synagogue until you build another one. In other words, first build a new synagogue, and only then you can go and demolish the old. And what's the reason for that? Well, you could figure it out. That's because of negligence, right? What happens, I mean, you can see that we know about cases like this where you demolish, you say, big plans, we're going to make a whole new big edifice, and you demolish the old one, and then the money runs out, you get into problems, the contractor doesn't show up and things, and then the new one never gets built. So we don't want that to happen. Therefore, there's a law. You can't demolish the old one until first you build a new one down the block somewhere, and then only then you can demolish the old one. So he says that the reason is because it might not come to be. But what about in this case? In this case, I need the materials from the old one. I'm actually using those very materials to build a new one. So I have to, and look, I'm going to do it, right? Because if I have those materials, I'll be able to, right? So that's what he thought himself. But he did ask another rabbi. He actually has two rabbis, and then they both prohibited. In other words, they were also afraid. You have good intention, you're going to build a new one, but still it takes a lot of work. You might need more materials, might not run out of funds. So no, first build a new one, and only then you can demolish the old one. Okay, Rava, who was very lenient before, he does have a stringency, and he says, Bet Knesset, yes, you are allowed to exchange it or sell it, and then once you exchange it or sell it, that building becomes not holy anymore. There are still limitations. You can't use it for a disgusting purpose like a bathhouse or a tannery. But once you sell a Bet Knesset, then it can be used for whatever, an office building. That's fine. So that you can do. What you cannot do is rent it out. Right? If I want to retain ownership of the Bet Knesset, the community's retained ownership, we're going to rent it out as office space. That's not allowed, because since you're renting it out and you still own it, it retains its sacred status. And so you can't use it for any other purpose, unless maybe you rent it out to be used as a Bet Knesset, right? But otherwise you can't. The only way to undo the Kiddusha of that space is to sell it. Furthermore, the bricks also, you can sell the bricks and for another use, and then the Kiddusha will leave the bricks and go on to the money. But to rent out the bricks, that would not be allowed, because they're still owned by the Bet Knesset. How do you rent out bricks, right? What happens when the rental's up? You got to knock down the thing. Okay, so we wouldn't rent out bricks today, but maybe they would back then if you're building like a temporary wall or something, and then you're going to bring the bricks back. So you cannot do that if the bricks belong to a Bet Knesset. But that's only regarding used bricks. The bricks were part of a Bet Knesset. Now you can't rent them out. But if they're new ones, in other words, you bought them as material while building a Bet Knesset, but you didn't use them yet,
or they're leftovers that you didn't need. So since they never were part of a bet knesset, that's okay. You can sell them, or you can rent them. Also rent them out because they don't have kedusha on them. And this is true even according to an opinion that says designation is significant. There's machloket somewhere else whether does something become kadosh when you say I'm going to use it for a kadosh purpose, or not until you actually use it for a kadosh purpose. So even according to the opinion that says mere designation already gives it a status, that is true only in some cases, like if someone weaves a garment that's going to be used as burial shrouds. So even if they're not yet used as burial shrouds, they're already dedicated to that purpose. And then you can't decide, you know what, I changed my mind. I think it looks stylish. I think I'm going to wear it tomorrow. No, it's dedicated for that. But here, this would be like a case of spinning thread, having in mind, I'm going to use this for burial shrouds. But that once, even if you're spinning the thread for that purpose, if you change your mind, say, I'm going to use the thread for something else, that's fine because it's not even an item yet. So too, bricks are not even an item just yet. So even the one who says that I bought these bricks in mind to use them for Bet Knesset, but I didn't use them yet. So then even that a person who says dedication is significant would not say that those bricks are holy and therefore you can rent them out for a non-sacred purpose. All right, we talked about selling. How about matana? What if the community elders, whoever's in charge of the committee, wants to give the synagogue as a gift to someone? So if they decide to sell it, then yes, we know that the holiness will go from the synagogue place to the money. Or if it's the 7 official elders, then not even to the money that can actually undo the sacred. Fine, that's all regarding sales. But how about with a gift? Of course, it's machloket. One says no, one says yes. The one who says no asks, where will the holiness go? When you're selling it, the holiness can go to the money, and then use the money to buy something more important. That's fine. But if you're just giving it as a gift, well, then there's nowhere for the holiness to go. So no, you can't. And the one who permits says, anytime you give a gift, there's always some reciprocity. Why would they decide to give this person a gift of the Bet Knesset? It must be he did or will do or is doing something good for the community in return. So even if it's not an official sale that he's actually giving money, he's doing good things. Maybe he donated something else, and so there is a return even to a gift, and so therefore we can treat it like a sale. Or imagine even both opinions would say you can give us some symbolic number. You pay $1, at least the kedusha can go on that something. All right, tenora banan tashmishe mitzvah nizrakin tashmishe kedusha nignazin. This is a very practical law. There's a difference between articles that are used for a mitzvah. Those can be thrown out in a respectful way, but nevertheless you can throw them out. Whereas articles that are used for holiness, you cannot throw in the garbage. You have to put them in geniza, put them away for literally means storage. We will bury it with in the ground with a body or without, and it has to be in the ground. Also respectfully. What are things that are used for mitzvah? Sukkah, lulav, shofar, sisit. Lulav is relevant every year. What do you do with the lulav when you're done? So most of us just leave it in the Bet Knesset. Okay, what does the Bet Knesset do with it? The answer is you are allowed to throw it out in the garbage, but don't put it in the disgusting, smelly garbage, right? You have to treat it nicely, wrap it up, put it in recycling, do it in a way that's nice. That's fine. This would apply to sukkah poles and things like that. Now, the articles used for holiness, deluskeme sefarim, tefillin mezuzot, v'tik shel sefer Torah, v'nartik shel tefillin, ur suotehen. So a case of a Torah scroll, I'm not sure what kind of case it's talking about. Probably not the one that we kind of use today, but something that holds a scroll. Tefillin mezuzot, a container. That sounds like it's a box or something that you put a Torah scroll in, and the cover of tefillin and the strap. So all these. This also happens. The strap of tefillin breaks, so you have to put that in geniza. Amar Rava, Ameresh Hava Amina Hai Kursaya Tashmish de Tashmishu Veshare. So Rava said this kursiya literally means a chair, a Torah chair. It probably is referring to either a lectern, like a chazan's table that you put the Torah on, but you don't put the Torah directly on it. Even with the ones that roll, like Ashkenazim use, it's the scroll itself would usually, and at least in those days, would be on a cloth and not directly on the wood part of the table, and so therefore. Or this might be some kind of stand that you put the Torah on temporarily while you're reading something else. Okay, so anyway, this Torah stand, I thought this is a tashmish of a tashmish because it's being used to hold the cloth that is being used to hold the Torah. Therefore, since it's a double step away, it's permitted. If it gets worn out, you can just throw it away. But then I saw that sometimes they put the Torah directly on the wooden part of it without an intervening cloth. And if that's the case, then it is in fact an article used for something holy directly, and it would be prohibited to throw it out. We have a whole list of things we have a couple of things of Rava that at first he thought this, then he changed his mind. So at first he thought this is a curtain that's placed in the Aron Kodesh as a kind of decoration or maybe in front. And so since it doesn't touch the Torah directly, but it's only there to decorate the Aron, which holds the Torah. So at first I thought it's a tashmish of a tashmish. And therefore, if it gets worn out, you'd be able to throw it out. But then I saw that sometimes this cloth, they take and they fold it under and they put the Torah on top of it. And therefore, it's touching the Torah directly. And that therefore is tashmish kedusha. And one may not throw it out. Another statement of the same sage. If you have a Aron Kodesh that fell apart, if you want to use the pieces of wood to make a smaller Aron Kodesh, that's permitted. You're using it for the same thing. But to make a lectern, to make something that only holds the Torah, see, Aron Kodesh holds the Torah all the time. This, the lectern only holds the Torah once in a while, so it's lesser sanctity, and so you can't use go from higher to lower. Good. Perisa de bala leme'abdeh perisa lesifre share lechumashin asir. A curtain that was used also to decorate the Aron and became worn out, to make it to use it for a higher level as a wrapping for a Sefer Torah. If to wrap a Sefer Torah is permitted, but to wrap an individual chumash is prohibited. In other words, because beforehand it was being used for the Aron Kodesh, and the Aron Kodesh holds Sifrei Torah. So Sifrei Torah are a higher level of Kedusha than an individual chumash, even though it's the same text, but an individual chumash is a study book. When you put all the 4 or 5 chumashim together, then it becomes a Sefer Torah, which can be used for public reading, and that has higher Kedusha. Cases for storing individual chumashim, and also the sacks for storing scrolls. These are also tashmish kedusha because they hold it and so that therefore they're holy. Hishita. Now, of course, isn't that obvious? Why do you even have to say this? I might have thought that these are not there to honor. It's not like a decorative cloth that gives more honor. That for sure would be a high level. But this is actually just to protect it so that it doesn't bang into things. So I might have thought that something that's only there for protection is not so important, is not a tashmish kedusha, and therefore comes to teach that decoration or protection are both tashmish kedusha. Dava petiach lehu edrona, dava machet bemet. One time there was a synagogue of the Jews of Rome, and one of the openings opened into a room that there was a dead body in, and so that the tum'ah then comes from that room and actually spreads throughout the Bet Knesset. And the Kohanim wanted to go in and pray, and now they couldn't. So what are they going to do? Atu amru lelrava amar lehu delu tebuta otubuha v'hadava le kili es asui lenachat uchli es asui lenachat eno mekabel tumah v'choses b'fnei tumah. So Rava said, I have an idea. You have an Aron Kodesh there, right? So take the Aron Kodesh and put it in front of the doorway. Since it's made out of wood, and Aron Kodesh is made although it's furniture, it's permanent furniture. You put it in one place and then you leave it there. It's not something that's a movable object. You don't use it to carry things on an irregular basis. And therefore, you put it there, and first of all, it will not receive tum'ah because it's a permanent structure, as if it's attached to the ground, and it can even block tum'ah from going through. All right, so it seems like a good solution. However, Amru le Rabbanan Rava ha zimnin de metaltelele ki manach sefer Torah leve v'avava le metaltela ma'lev rekam yachi lahav shah. But the rabbi said, yeah, but sometimes we take the Torah and this Aron Kodesh, and we actually do move it with the Torah in it or on it. And so this is actually considered a movable piece of furniture. And this particular Aron, they would move it on some regular basis. And says if that's the case, if it's a movable object, then it's not like it's attached to the ground. It does receive tumah, and therefore it will not block the tumah from the next room. And so in the end, that was not a good solution in that case. Amar Mor Zutra, mitpechot sefarim shebalu osinotan tachrichin lemet misva v'zohi genizatam. Wrappings of cloth, wrapping cloths of Sefer Torah that became worn out. You know what you can do with them? Make them into burial shrouds for a met mitzvah, for someone who has no one to bury them. If it's someone who is a family member, so usually the person, their estate, their family members, they buy burial shrouds, so you don't have to worry about them. But someone who's just a body found, we don't know who it is. So who's going to buy the burial shrouds? You know what? Use the cloths from the Sefer Torah. Not that this is a higher level, but this is a way of doing genizah. You're burying it, and you're also helping out this poor person who otherwise wouldn't have we wouldn't have funds to buy burial shrouds for him. Amar Rava, Sefer Torah shebala gonzin oto esel talmidei chachamim. And so further about sometimes the Sefer Torah is such bad shape, so we have to bury it. You should bury it near a Torah scholar. It gives it more honor than just burying it in some random hole. Even if the Torah scholar is not the greatest sage in the world, even if he just knows how to read straight halachot, right? He knows how to read Shulchan Aruch, Yakut Yosef, but he doesn't know how to go back into the sources, into the Gemara. Even if it's a relatively medium level sage, that's still an honor to have the Torah next to him for the Torah. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov u'bechli cheres lemar untate bechli cheres leman yamdu yamim rabim. And you should also bury the Torah in an earthenware vessel so that it can last for a long time, as we learned from Yirmiyah, who put his the deed in a clay vessel so it would last a long time. And we know this works because the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them, the ones that were in clay jars, did fare much better than the ones in the caves where they were not in clay jars, which were almost totally worn out. Okay, V'amar papi mishmei de Rava, bebe kenishta lebe Rabbanan share, bebe Rabbanan lebe kenishta asir. So papi, in the name of Rabbah, says that you can exchange, you can sell a Bet Knesset to buy a bet banan, a bet midrash, a study hall, because the learning of Torah is greater than prayer. But to sell a study hall and buy a bet knesset, that's lower level, so that's not allowed. That's Rav Papi said that. However, Rav Papa, not to be confused, they're two different sages. Mishmed Rava, even though they're both students of Rava, Matni Pecha, and he learned from Rava the opposite, the other way around, that you can go from a bet midrash to a bet knesset, but not bet knesset to bet midrash. So who's right? Amar Ravacha kevate Rav Papi mistabera. The first one is right. Amar Rav Yehoshua ben Levi bet knesset mutar la'asoto bet midrash shema mina. Because Yehoshua ben Levi, he's a first generation sage, and he said bet knesset you're allowed to convert into a bet midrash. Because there's although bet knesset is very important for a congregation to get together and they pray and they learn and they hear Torah, but bet midrash where the sages get together and they study Torah in depth, that is a higher level of kedusha. So that's what we learn, and that's where we conclude. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.